Hello everyone. Now that you have taken the quiz, so I'm hoping you could answer all the questions correctly. This video specifically will able to provide you with the answers and make sure that you got most of the answers correct, if not all. But anyway, this video covers the later part of the week's reading, which is basically about what democracy is and what it is not. We will be talking about the two readings here by Schmitzer and Terry, and then by Robert Tal. This is just a to political scientist, which was published in journal. It doesn't involve any research, but they're just mentioning in the journal article what democracy is and what democracy is not. So we see that in the article, page 4, they basically list um, some of the basic key elements of democracy, and through that they're trying to explain what are the essential components of democracy. Let's go over those some of the basic elements of democracy. First thing, democracy needs to have a citizen. It's not any ruler or monarch, but it is by the citizens. Democracy functions with citizens. Of course, the concept of citizens have been evolved over the time, and initially it was only people, aristocrats, or people with property, or to go back to even Plato's time, it was only the scholars or the learned ones, and then it changed to property class. Then it was extended to only men, and uh, even early Independence Day of America, it was restricted only to the whites, and but it has evolved over the time, and now it's much more universal. And the concept of citizens is much more universal now and includes mm, more categories of people. So that's one main element of democracy, that it has as citizens, it has the concept of citizens as against any other form of government. The next basic element is the competition. It should have a competition with various factions. We can say, for example, Russia, or where you don't have such mm, aspect of competition or any authoritarian regime. On the contrary, democracy provides for such competition between factions, and then you have election between this competition to decide uh, who gets to control the government or make the policies. Mm, so it should have an election, where people have a say to decide whom they want to see them governed. That's one other element of democracy. And again, election itself is not really important. It should not. It should be a majority government, yet it should have some protection for minority. Um, like, well, for example, in America, where it's a pluralistic society. It's not just that majority gets to rule. Of course, majority is what decides who gets to rule in democracy, but there is also some protection for minority rights. That's one of the elements of democracy. In democracy, even though people get to power through elections and winning majority in elections, yet once they are enrolled, there is always some form of protection to minority rights, and that's where I think Joy will be. Um, um, that's where the democracy plays an important role. It's that, even with the majority role, it's not necessarily the majority control, but it's more of like uh, majority with the protection of minority roles. So now we have seen that what democracy, what basic elements of democracy. Let's move into what are some of the key procedures of democracy. Um, we see that democracy is in democracy control government control is in the hands of elected officials. As against say some religious leaders. For example, in Iran, mm, you have religious leaders controlling the government. That Ayatollah is the religious head, and they control the government. Or any military regimes where, like junta regimes, where military controls the government. As against these, in democracy, you have government control in the hands of elected officials. That's one of the key procedures of democracy. Next, you have frequent and independent election. So it's very important. Its elections are frequent with a regular time period, and such elections are independent, and that's where you have a lot of late we have the question of interference, in the election. Is it free and fair elections? And that's where even some of the um, uh, African regimes have this problem of uh, transition to democracy where elections are happening but may not be independent elections. So that's where one of the key procedures of democracy is not only frequent elections at regular interval but also independent elections. And the third point, which procedure is practically everyone can vote and be voted. When we say practically, of course, there is certain age limit set in the constitution of their respective democratic regimes, and whoever has um, crossed that age limit gets to vote, and of course, you have to be citizen of that particular country. So that's one other key procedure of democracy, where you have that power of voting. Then you have freedom of speech, political speech. You get to express your opinion or political voice. You have that freedom of uh, uh, political speech. That's another key procedure of democracy. You should be able to express your opinion, your political thought, or your political ideas. And the second, another procedure is freedom to seek alternative source of information. This, as of late, has been very popular and in news. You should be able to have many uh, avenues for getting information and getting the source. So as against any authoritarian regime, for example, in China, or in North Korea, for example, the source of information is government. Or whatever the government is saying, the people have to believe. There is no alternative source of information for them to follow or even listen to. But in democracy, there should be freedom of seeking alternative source of information. Then freedom of association. Just seeking information or having political speech does not make sense without freedom of association. Freedom of association means you should be able to gather and do rally or express your political ideas and ideology by in the form of a group or in a collective voice. You should be able to do that in a democracy, and democracy provides for such procedures uh, to occur. Then another important procedures of democracy is sovereignty. The concept of sovereignty is that any democratic government is free from external control. This is where I think you all this recent investigation whether Russia interfered in the um, in the elections of America is all the questions comes because that also uh, boils down to whether there was external interference. So democratic government is uh, have the sovereignty over external control. That's one other key procedures of democracy. Now let's go and see what democracy is not. Uh, and again, the article talks about these things. The democracy not necessarily more efficient economically. Democracy provides for uh, um, more um, um, more open exchange between people, but it may not be more efficient economically. Um, Through more open societies and polities, their economies may be protectionist. So democracy might have protectionist policies which might not be helpful for economic growth. So democracy might not be efficient economically. Again, necessarily democracy may not be efficient administratively. We have seen that in U.S. case, for example, in the previous administration, Obama administration, for the last out of 8 years, I think six years or so, nothing happened. No policies were able to formulate for various reasons. There was debate and Congress, nothing was getting passed. So democracy might not be necessarily efficient administratively. Um, there is always in you know um, appearance more orderly uh, uh, and consensual, stable, or governable. Uh, So democracy is not necessarily stable or governable. So you could see that um, in the American case, you have government shutdowns. The concept of government shutdown for various reasons, and this um, for various reasons, and this government shutdown is not limited to the current administration. There was government shutdown in previous administrations too in America. That's basically because of lack of agreement or consensus between the various factions or various groups or various